So good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Trombley, and I'm chair of the D-BRAC Committee for Portland Public Schools, and I just wanted to formally welcome everybody here to the meeting tonight. Roger, can you hear me in the back? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for all those who have come to listen to the presentations tonight and offer public comment, as well as those who will be watching the YouTube footage once it gets posted later this week. We're going to go ahead and get started. I just wanted to quickly walk through the agenda and go through the agenda events for tonight, and then we'll go ahead. So we're going to go through and look at the meeting notes that we've got to approve from last week's meeting. We'll do 15 minutes of public comment, which our facilitator, Jim Jacks, will walk you through the protocols and procedures. And then the substantive item tonight is going to be a 2-hour discussion and looking at some of the deeper school-level data in terms of how do the proposed enrollment balancing scenarios impact the different schools and clusters at a building and community level. And then after that, we'll get an overview of what the community meeting schedule will look like and how D-BRAC is going to participate. So with that is the quick overview of the agenda. And then with that, the next item that we're going to go right on into is review and adoption of the meeting notes. So D-BRAC members, and I think is the left side of your folder, are the notes from our meeting on October 29th. So if everyone would take just a quick minute or two to look at those and offer and see if those are correct or you have any proposed changes. What I would also say is once you're done looking at the notes and are ready to take next steps and actions, if you would put your name card, standing up so I know, that would be great. Thanks. And just a clarification, as folks are looking at the notes for our committee members and audience members, you'll also note on the back couple of pages are summaries of both the verbal public comment that was given at our meeting last time, as well as short summaries of those who offered written comment into the record. So I just wanted to note that as well. All right, thank you very much. So with that, do any members have any changes or amendments to offer to the meeting notes from our meeting on October 29th?
I just don't know the protocol on this, but in the comments that were submitted, hang on. I don't know the protocol on this, but the comments that were submitted online are we publishing people's personal email addresses?
Yep.
It has their name, but then it has their personal email address and then their comment. Just a thought. I don't know.
I'm going to turn that question over to staff.
I apologize for not reviewing that in advance. It wasn't our intent to do that, and we will strike those. So if you hand back these copies to us,
sure,
we'll strike those from the approved set. That is not something that we would intend to display.
Okay. Thank you. So what we'll note is the final version that is published and adopted will not have the email addresses of those who offered written comment. Are there any other changes to these minutes? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of adopting the minutes from October 29th as amended, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? With one abstention, all right, the meeting notes are adopted as amended. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Jacks, who will facilitate public comment.
Thank you, Chair Trombley. So tonight is a working committee meeting, and the D-BRAC is interested in public comment. And there, as Jason outlined, there are several other important agenda items later in the evening. The good news is this is not your only opportunity to share information with D-BRAC and to influence this process. On the back of this is a whole series of community meetings happening over the course of November. They're at a variety of times and locations, and D-BRAC encourages you to participate in those. And if you would like to share a comment but don't want to speak into the microphone, use the green card. You can write anything down at any point during the meeting and turn it in to us and the communication staff at the back table, and that will get included in the D-BRAC record. So at this point, I've got this set of people who are interested in speaking. We have a 2-minute timer, and I will flash a yellow card when you've got about 15 or 20 seconds left, and I'll be right here, and when I stand up, that is your cue to finish up so that the next person can get their 2 minutes as well. And the committee is very interested that you say your name and the school that you're associated with. And if you're a parent of kids in several schools, please mention each school. So what we'll do right now is call some people up, and I'd like to call you up 2 or 3 at a time, just so that we don't spend all day waiting for people to make their way to the microphone. So Brad Nelson, and then Janine Partovi, and I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's names, and then Jen Fortman are the first 3. So name and school that you're associated with, and take it away. Thank
Okay.
you.
My name is Janine Partovi. I'm the PTA president at Bridal Mile Elementary. This is my 7th year as a parent at Bridal Mile. I have 4 children, a 7th grader at West Sylvan, 2 5th graders at Bridal Mile, and a 1st grader. Brad, who's going to speak in a minute, and I are representing the Bridal Mile community tonight. Bridal Mile has been consistently present at D-BRAC meetings over the last year, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. We had about 120 people at a community meeting on Monday at Bridal Mile, and our strategy team is here. The current PPS proposal, as both scenarios are the same for Bridal Mile, would make Bridal Mile the only split feeder elementary school in the district. This proposal treats Bridal Mile differently than any other school. It is unfair and inequitable. There is a reason elementary split feeders do not already exist in the district. It fractures communities, friendships, and even individual families, and creates extreme emotional distress for very young children. Based on your values framework, we believe the D-BRAC committee already understands the detrimental effect of this proposal.
Thank you.
Can she yield her time to me?
Go for it.
Chairman Trombley, members of the committee, thank you very much for your work in the committee, everything that you're doing. My name is Brad Nelson. I'm with Bridal Mile Elementary. I have 2 children, Chloe, who's a 4th grader, and Gavin, who is a kindergartner. Based on the research that I've done along with our focus group, we're pretty confident that the net impact for Lincoln in the proposals, both 1 and 2, is very small. We don't understand why PPS is going to upend a community with something that is going to have a minimal impact for the high school. Our concern is that West Sylvan right now is not overcrowded. There's a bond that's going to happen next year with Lincoln High School. Things are in motion, but it seems like people want to rush and do something, and Bridal Mile is the one that's taking the brunt of that. Our committee has associated with Lincoln for a long time, since 1987, as best I can tell. We have kids in the youth sports and kids all over the place. Our community now, though, is fractured. I mean, you're wanting half of our kids to go to one school. Well, it's not half. I actually don't know what the numbers are, but you get the gist. My kids have to make a decision in 3rd grade who's going to be their friend, because they know that in a couple of years they're not going to have that person with them anymore. And that's just not fair. We're mobilizing as a committee. We've sent out a lot of surveys, got over 350 responses. A lot of people can't show up at these things, but we got them to write down. We had them check a box. Do you want your email published? And do you want your name published with your comments to the D-BRAC committee? I would comment that I have asked for quite a bit of data over the last week. Tonight is the first time that I've seen this, and I think the committee should be surprised that this is the first time that these numbers. A cursory glance at this, page 15 of the draft, has West Sylvan's change at 204, which is a 3-year school, but the net change to Lincoln High School is 202. It seems that's very strange that those numbers would be different. I look forward to working with the committee. I've reached out on a number of occasions. We have a lot of scenarios. Chairman Trombley and other people, we look forward to working with you to come up with something that works. Thank you.
Thank you. Jen Fortman and then Stuart Weir.
Hello, Jen Fortman, Irvington School. I have 2 kids. I'm here speaking on behalf of many parents in our school. After last week's presentation of scenarios, we at Irvington, in conversation with Laurelhurst and Beverly Cleary, parents are still struggling to pencil scenario 1 as doing anything to really right-size schools. Your utilization rate, we don't have enough information on your website to truly understand the utilization rate. But if we take our current year, or last year's occupancy rate, back that out to a building capacity, and then take our numbers this year, bring in half of the K-5, or even not half of the K-5 from Beverly Cleary into Irvington, into Laurelhurst, we're looking at numbers that look like very near, if not at capacity, in year 1 of scenario 1. So my request here is that the D-BRAC, at least, if not the entire community, be provided a bit more transparency around how those numbers really do pencil. And I appreciate I don't have access to all your calculation, but it's a big concern, especially if we're looking at upending successful K-8 programs in the name of balancing enrollment. Point 2, equity. Currently, at Irvington, we enjoy some measure of diversity in our community. Scenario 1 maxes out our capacity to the extent that your newly adopted transfer policy does not allow us to continue to admit kids from outside of our geographical boundaries and retain our equity. Number 3 is a programmatic concern that I expressed last meeting. Sorry, you have to listen to me again. But that is, we heard the ways in which IB schools and immersion programs were evaluated programmatically in terms of the impact of these various boundary changes. My school, and I know several others in our cluster of Northeast K-8s, will continue to insist that the D-BRAC consider the programmatic impact of overturning programs which, after many years of work, are now working well. One more comment, do I have 15 seconds?
You have like 5 seconds.
I have 5 seconds. Okay, I think the Oregon Kitchen Table Survey is being used in a way that is a disingenuous application of that data. Nowhere in that survey was it indicated that data would be used in the way that it's being used to approve or disapprove of a set of proposals that were never on the table for those of us filling them out online. Thank you.
Thank you. Stuart Weir, and then Rosemary Campbell de Coelho. Sorry, Mr. Weir.
Good evening. My name is Stuart Weir. I'm a parent of a second grader at Laurelhurst K-8, as well as a younger daughter who I hope will be enrolled there next fall. I wish I knew that for sure. I think one unfortunate upshot of the 2 scenarios as they've been presented is that they've kind of created a perceived internal opposition within the Laurelhurst school community. Most of my peers are supporting scenario 2, which would preserve a K-8 model that many, myself included, feel has been very successful at Laurelhurst. And yet, if scenario 2 is adopted as laid out, my kids and half of our neighborhood will be forced to leave our school because we happen to live on the wrong side of 52nd Avenue south of Halsey. Like a lot of families in our neighborhood, we've invested a lot of time kind of knitting ourselves into the school community, getting to know our friends in the Euclid Heights neighborhood that's in the boundary. We've walked we walk to school together, we pick our kids up from school together, we've even set up an after-school co-op. But if this goes through without amendments, our kids will have to be separated from their peer community. I also feel that scenario 2's boundary adjustments don't really do much for the school itself. I think Laurelhurst, it's not much of a secret, it's one of the more affluent student bodies in the district. And the neighborhood that I'm living in is predominantly working class, economically disadvantaged, and I think that running a border through 52nd could exacerbate a perception that Laurelhurst is a school for economically privileged. So in closing, I would request that as the committee moves forward, it considers amending this aspect, at least of scenario 2, by either adjusting the proposed south of Halsey boundary so it doesn't run through an active neighborhood, or by preserving the current grandfather policy for existing students and their siblings, or by allowing a dual option for effective households to choose which track they can take. Thank you.
Thank you. So Rosemary, and then after her is Helen Kilber. Coelho?
Coelho.
Thank you.
My name is Rosemary Campbell de Coelho, and I'm the mother of Jamie, who's a 4th grader at Skyline Elementary School. And I'm here because, frankly, there's a lot of us that are confused on why you want to take an exceptional school like Skyline, who is an international baccalaureate certified school from K through 8, and fracture our community, fracture our children. We have a successful program at Skyline. Children get good education there. I found it on the map, it was really kind of ironic that Skyline is considered not only overcrowded, but under-enrolled. So I'm not quite sure how it can be overcrowded, but under-enrolled. And Skyline used to be a K through 8 years ago. Then they fractured it into K through 5 and a middle school and sent them to West Sylvan and East Sylvan. It was a miserable experience for many, many parents and students who spent hours on the bus, hours they could have been home studying. And not only that, but then you had parents running back from Skyline to Sylvan to East Sylvan. It was ridiculous. And luckily, Skyline was able to reintegrate 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in 3 consecutive years, and it has been running a successful program since then. And I'm rather befuddled as to why Portland Public Schools wants to take a school like Skyline and jeopardize our children's education and jeopardize a successful program. Thank you.
Thank you. Helen Kilber, and then Ramona Peralt.
Hi, I'm Helen Kilber. I'm from Sabin School, where I have a grade 3 and a grade 5 student. Sabin is, I listen to people saying they've sent out surveys and they've been involved, and Sabin is behind. We're sending out a survey this week to gather people's input. But I wanted to share some of the things that I feel and that I've heard around the schoolyard as people react to the proposal, which is scenario 1 is to create a Tubman Middle School very close to here, where all Sabin students would go to middle school along with 3 other schools. And the second proposal, scenario 2, is that Sabin remain a K through 8, which is pretty passionately what I'm hearing that people want. And I'm just going to read the notes I jotted to myself. So Sabin staying as a K through 8 actually meets a lot of the criteria for this committee, whereas establishing a Tubman Middle School and having Sabin truck on down to Tubman Middle School really does not at all consistent with compact boundaries. The routes to school are less safe. Our students they walk to school now, they bike to school. They're going to have to cross 15th, Fremont, MLK, Williams, Vancouver, and Russell to get to school. And that's at peak hour. Have you seen those streets at peak hour? I drive those streets and I'm scared. So that is, not good. That's a fail on that KPI. Community, it doesn't overlap at all with our neighbourhood boundaries. And to the point my colleague from Skyline just raised, we're an IB baccalaureate school. It is super important for our community to work together. I'm co-chair of our STEAM program. Our middle year students mentor our primary year students for the science fair. They get to see what they're going to be doing in middle school by working with their middle school near peers. Our middle schoolers help maintain our computer equipment. They run around and maintain all the stuff for the entire school. There are numerous ways that we are building a great, coherent program, and that's going to be split apart. There's not even enough parking here for the students, for the parents rather, who come down and volunteer their time in the middle school and in the primary school program around IB. So that's all going to fall away. I'm getting a wave. Travel times will go up. Our students won't walk to school. Total fail on that KPI. Limited impact to students? No, we had boundary changes in 2012. That's not even on the list of boundary changes on one of the documents that's floating around. We had boundary changes in 2012. I really want to pitch for our grade 6 students. Our current grade 6 students are going to go to Sabin 1 year, Tubman the next year, Marshall because of the grant remodel, and then Grant. 4 schools in 4 years. That's just not okay for grade 6 students. I was also shocked, one more point, that I looked to see comparability on what if 6 to 8 graders in K-8 schools, how have they performed compared to MYP schools. I can't find it. It's not published. The latest report is 2011. I know it's not one of your KPIs, but surely student academic performance matters. So I will leave my comments there.
Thank you. So Ramona Peralt, and then our last two, Ann Reed and Emily Lynn. Ramona.
Hi, thanks for the hard work you all do for our community. I really appreciate it. I have a third grader at Beverly Cleary School, so we've been doing the Rose City commute this year. And I've been talking to my immediate peers at Beverly Cleary, and we are all very concerned about scenario 1. We have a group of parents who have begun crunching the numbers, and it's unclear to us how Irvington and Laurelhurst could absorb the kinds of numbers that we're talking about, shifting from Beverly Cleary to those two schools. And I'd really encourage the district to make that information really available and clear as we move forward. I'm also just terribly concerned about the amount of resources that went into the K-8 conversion in the district. And the parents who worked very hard, hand in hand with teachers in the district, to make that work. So the idea that we would undo that work and begin the hard work of transitioning to K-5s and middle schools is really distressing. So I would ask you all to ask the following questions as you work your way through this process. Does the district have the money to do scenario 1 right? And by right, I mean, will we end up with middle schools that we can feel good about as families? Do we really need to take apart 3 successful K-8s, Irvington, Laurelhurst, and Beverly Cleary, to address overcrowding? And will scenario 1 right-size our schools for the long term? And finally, I'd like to remind you how important our neighborhood schools are to building our communities. Any scenario you come up with is going to bring about some fracturing. That's just the reality. But I'd ask that one of the criteria you use is how to keep current successful K-8 schools as whole as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. So Ann Reed and then Emily Lynn.
Hello, I am Ann Reed, and I have 2 kids at Laurelhurst and 1 at Richmond. I have to agree with the parents that have several parents that have spoken. Jen Fortman from Irvington, asking that you individually look at our K-8 schools, and also the parent that just spoke from Beverly Cleary. There are concerns about numbers and how those are going to shift from Beverly Cleary into Laurelhurst. And that brings me to the point of you yourselves have defined Laurelhurst as being a right-sized school. And we're very concerned about breaking that up in either scenario. We either have our middle schoolers go to Beverly Cleary Middle School and stay at K-5, which splits our community, or we remain at K-8 and lose what the parent was talking about, that little chunk that was in Euclid Heights. So I would also advocate for keeping our right-sized community together for all of the same reasons that they've been talking about. You know, all of the benefits that we have for all of our students, the hard work that went into transitioning Laurelhurst from a K-5 to a K-8, and, you know, the time and the money, frankly. We just got science labs for our middle school in 2013 and 2014 with the school improvement bond, and now those are really just going to go to waste, I'm assuming, if scenario 1 happens. I'd also like to ask you to really thoughtfully consider the transition. We have curriculum for our 7th and 8th graders that are in blended classes for social studies, science, and language arts, and we'd like to know how that transition, if they are pulled apart from our existing school, will go. And there's other questions. I'm sure you'll be hearing more from our community, but thank you for your hard work. I think there's still much work to be done.
Thank you. Emily Lynn.
Hi, I'm another mother of 3 in Laurelhurst, and I just wanted to echo what the last couple of moms have said about just really enjoying our community at Laurelhurst and really valuing the K-8 model. I do think of our school as a successful right-sized school. I'm a little bit concerned about overcrowding with the change. I'm looking at page 6 of the data that you guys have given us tonight. And it looks like in the average enrollment per grade at Laurelhurst right now is 74 per grade, which translates to about 24 kids per class. And then in scenario 1, which I'm very much against, because we want to preserve our K-8, all of a sudden with the new kids being shuffled to Laurelhurst, it's going to be 160 kids per grade, which translates to 32 kids per class. To me, that's a big change. I mean, I really value our school, and I think it really works well the way it is. I'm also concerned about a 12-year-old having to pass over I-84 to go to Beverly Cleary. That to me is not safe. That means that we're going to have to drive, and that really splits up the community for us. I'm also worried that people will be less emotionally and financially invested in our school because it will no longer be a K-8. A lot of parents give a lot of money in a K-8 situation and a lot of time because it's a long time for their kids to be in the school. For a kid to only go K-5, it makes a big difference. I think that the whole community will be a little bit less invested. So I just wanted to make those points. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes public comment. Turning it back to Jason or Judy. Sarah. Or John.
Hi, everyone. Again, John Isaacs, Chief of Communications and Public Affairs. And I wanted to just take a moment to introduce Aaron Brown right here, if you were wondering who he is. So I mentioned to you last time we were hiring a full-time note taker for the rest of this process. So Aaron will be here taking notes, writing up executive summaries of meetings and the community feedback meetings, which start Monday night. So all of the reports you get will be coming from Aaron. So I wanted to make sure you knew he was here and to say, introduce yourself to him. Really glad to have him on the team for the rest of this process. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the presentation, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, which is to lead into the discussions you're having tonight. So the objective of this presentation, and it's a lot shorter than last week, is to highlight new information about the scenarios, and I want to clarify that means we're going to highlight information about the scenarios that was not highlighted last week. It doesn't mean that there's new scenarios, okay? So I want to make sure that's clear. And we're going to gather your feedback on enrollment balance on the scenarios tonight, okay? Begin that process, actually. So again, to remind everyone, the goals of this overall project are to balance enrollment, so all schools are right-sized to sustainably offer the core program, and to manage future enrollment growth to support strong schools in all neighborhoods, and those are printed on both scenarios. So, what are the challenges that we have? Many schools and grades are under-enrolled. Many schools are overcrowded and enrollment is increasing in the future. And many schools are not large enough to support preferred enrollment, especially K-8s. And I want to mention, because a question was asked from one of our speakers, we have some buildings who have both of these scenarios at once. They're under-enrolled, yet because of the capacity of the facility, they are overcrowded, even though they're under-enrolled because the building is so tiny. So that's what that means. I just wanted to clarify that. I thought it was a good question. So the strategy to address these challenges is to create a better mix of K-8 and K-5s in middle schools so that more schools are offering the core program in buildings of the appropriate size, supported by a sufficient number and distribution of students. And one thing to remember from the presentation last week, this means that the core program can be offered without the use of additional funds, such as parent fundraising or title funds that we know are being used in some schools to do that today. Okay, so this is a slide we haven't shown you in a while, so we just wanted to remind people where we are in the process. So this outlines the process we've been working on for quite a while now in its entirety. So we started the one today. This is D-BRAC recommended a values framework to the superintendent over the summer. Superintendent Smith considered it, and she forwarded that framework on to the PPS board, who about 6 weeks ago adopted a resolution endorsing the work that you did to that point. They said, yes, we endorse this values framework for the rest of this process and for enrollment balancing in the future. That will now be what the framework we use in the future at the district. The staff worked to apply the values framework, assess the desired outcomes, applied a racial equity lens, and has considered other levers to come up with the scenarios that you have today. So that work was done by the staff. That was presented to D-BRAC last week for the first time. So we are now moving to this phase of the process, community and stakeholder feedback on the scenarios. And that feedback will go to staff and this committee. You will work with us and consider the feedback from the community, work to improve the scenarios, which we've said we expect to change. This isn't a pick one or the other. We expect new ideas and new scenarios to be developed, recommended to the superintendent, who will consider that recommendation and then recommend a final plan, single plan, to the PPS board, who will then consider it and have their own process. Once the PPS board has a recommendation, they have their own process, which will likely involve more community feedback, and they are scheduled to adopt a final plan about mid-February. Okay? So that's where we are in this process. So just another way of looking at it, so the first step, the next step is public involvement or feedback, and our first meeting is Monday evening at Hosford Middle School. So feedback will take place over the month of November. We'll launch the survey next week online as well. You will then work with staff to consider that feedback and refine the scenarios into what will likely be new scenarios and make a recommendation to the superintendent. The finalizing work will be done by the superintendent. She'll recommend a single plan to the school board, who will then consider that, again, have their own process, and then is scheduled, hopefully, to adopt a final plan around mid-February. Implementation, that would include an implementation plan which could begin in the fall of 2016 and could take several years. Okay, and then an update to everyone here on the resources that are available. We've made significant progress in the last week, as we told you we expected to. So you have, I believe everyone here has now side-by-side comparisons of the scenarios. So we've developed a side-by-side comparison where any member of the community will be able to look down, find their school, and compare them next to each other. Okay, so scenario 1 means this for my school, scenario 2 means this. It is in Spanish, and it was finished. We completed translation in all our languages today, so tomorrow it will be available in all languages. Right today, it's available on the website as a PDF in both Spanish and English. And then, as you know, as we said we would, yesterday we made detailed scenario maps by region available on the website. The other thing I wanted to let you know we were able to do with our new school messenger tool, so we knew we were going to be able to do this, but we did it for the first time. So when we loaded up the Spanish side-by-side comparison of the scenarios, for the first time we were able to send an email in Spanish to all of our Spanish-speaking families. We are going to do that tomorrow for all of our other non-English speaking families. So families, when they registered their children for school and checked that said, my preferred language is a language other than English that we support, so Vietnamese, Somali, Russian, and so on, they will get emails in their language tomorrow with links to these materials. So that's the first time we've been able to do that as a district, and we can track those the way we've been able to our other emails. So we can look and see how many people opened it, how many people skimmed it. It's a new feature. We're really glad to have it that we believe will build more equity into our communications over time. Okay, so I'm going to now turn it over to Sarah, who will talk about the scenarios.
So again, my name is Sarah Singer, Senior Director of System Planning and Performance. So I'm going to just give a quick recap of the two scenarios in specifically how they are similar. So they both involve a large degree of grade reconfiguration from K-8s to middle schools and K-5s. They both involve opening of new schools. They both solve the majority of under-enrollment issues and overcrowding issues. They both increase the number of split feeder patterns. They both involve changes to every high school boundary, and both have opportunities for immersion growth, and they both would involve phased implementation. So I also wanted to go over some what I would call conceptual similarities and also around these scenarios, as well as sort of how the scenario development process occurred. So the first thing to note is that the scenario development prioritized solving under-enrollment and overcapacity issues first. And we did that because we thought that that aligned best with the D-BRAC values framework's desired outcomes. So the impact of that prioritization is that we see progress on overcrowding and under-enrollment issues, and we see that most of them are addressed because that's what we focused on. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the other key performance indicators or values that we talked about. So we had talked about proximity at one point, and proximity, what we did in the scenario development is if students were going to be reassigned because of overcrowding or under-enrollment issues, then we took proximity into account. But we didn't just start by trying to optimize for proximity. The other thing is that redistribution of students based on race or poverty did not drive the scenario development, because when we looked at that D-BRAC values framework, we did not think that that was prioritized in the same way that right-sizing our schools was. And so I'm going to talk a little bit just to go over some of the D-BRAC values framework and some of specifically your language around the values. So you talk about access, so that was regardless of any student demographic, every student will have access to and opportunities to benefit from equitable and effective academic programs. So that is one of the values stated, and in order to do that, we have to have the right enrollment in buildings. So that, again, is why that was such a key driver in scenario development. Environment was another one of the key values. It is to enable equitable access to programs. All school facilities should have the appropriate student enrollment, grade configuration, and physical support for programmatic needs that match the size of the facility. Again, that spoke very strongly to us around right-sizing schools, addressing overcrowding, addressing under-enrollment. And then equity in process and outcomes is a primary development of the successful boundary review. Talks about using the racial educational equity policy and looking at demographics and educational groupings to ensure that the policy supports strong outcomes for these and other subgroups. So these are just some of your language. And so in terms of disaggregating data, I know earlier this week we sent you some data on some global KPIs, and it said, for example, that we know our African American or our Black students are more likely disproportionately live in neighborhoods that have 2 sections or less per grade in their schools, meaning they live disproportionately in neighborhoods with under-enrolled schools. So that would be an example of disaggregating our data. Something else to note around the scenario development is this is a very cross-departmental effort involving many different skill sets and expertise domains across the district. So I wanted to talk about what's going on around these scenarios. So our facilities department is reviewing the cost and timeline for opening schools and reviewing options to address immediate overcrowding at some schools to inform the implementation timeline. We have transportation, who is addressing potential new bus routes and they're the point of contact for the safe routes to schools concerns. We have dual language. They're looking right now at the potential for additional expansion of dual language immersion in each scenario. We have special education. They're assessing the potential movement of the 5 out of the 53 special education focused classrooms that are impacted in these scenarios. And we have the Office of Schools, and they're organizing an implementation team specifically charged with a middle grades focus and middle school focus, so how to create those strong middle schools. So I also want to talk a little bit about some of the conceptual differences across the scenarios. So one is that if you look at scenario 1, converts more schools to K-8s and to K-5s in middle schools. So what is the resulting impact from that? Well, one is that you have more schools with preferred enrollment. So when you look at those global KPIs, that's what you'll see. And what I mean by that is 3 sections per grade in grades 6 through 8. And remember, a section is 25 students per section is our assumption there. And the reason, so middle schools can hold more sections per grade than can K-8s. So that's why you see this resulting impact by going to, by having a system that converts more to middle schools. But there's a trade-off, which scenario 2 outlines here. And if you convert fewer schools from K-8s into K-5s in middle schools, what you see overall is fewer students being reassigned, and you see more students within walking distance to schools. Because if you have more K-8s, you can imagine a more compact boundary. So your proximity is probably going to be more favorable in scenario 2 at a global level. And I understand that individual school communities will experience changes differently. So I'm just talking global for a moment. Okay, so the other conceptual difference is around high school enrollment. So I wanted to talk about what happens with high school enrollment specifically. So in scenario 1, Madison and Roosevelt we call them catchment areas, but really that's sort of like the neighborhood size. Their neighborhood sizes are actually reduced. And the impact there is that Madison and Roosevelt therefore could see a decline in enrollment in comparison to other schools. So that is, that would run counter to one of the goals of high school system design, which was launched in 2010, to have, to generate more enrollment parity across the high school system. So this would be a problem in scenario 1. Scenario 2, Madison's neighborhood catchment area or neighborhood is increased. Roosevelt stays about the same. And so that is, so overall Madison would experience an increase in enrollment. Roosevelt's enrollment stays about the same or experiences a slight decrease. So I'm gonna, one other caveat about this is something to note, and we're gonna bring this to you very shortly, but we're looking at, the data that I just presented was using 2014 October 1 data. We're going to look at when you use forecast data from 2020 and what we would estimate. So one thing to note is when you do that, all high schools we believe their enrollment will be increased, okay? And like I said, we will have the part 2 of the high school analysis out very shortly. And so with that, I'm going to go, you should have this sheet in your packets. Okay, and so what this does is it goes through each high school. You have the October 1, 2014 enrollment here. You have the scenario 1 resulting enrollment. And I want to be really careful about these. I don't want you to read too precisely into these, and I'll tell you why. It's actually very difficult to predict high school enrollment for a number of reasons. One is the dual assignment zone. There's a couple of, in the Northeast area, there's schools that have the opportunity to go to Jefferson or Madison, or Jefferson and Roosevelt, or Grant and Jefferson, and those are just, quite frankly, very difficult to predict. So I'm just going to be frank with that on this data. So then you have scenario 1 resulting enrollment, and then you have the estimated change. So you can see that Lincoln's enrollment would go down by 202 and Wilson's up by 200. And I think there was a comment in the audience about that. And the reason why those numbers are different is because we're applying existing capture rates to these numbers. So remember, you have an underlying change that happens at the neighborhood, and then you have what we call a capture rate, which is the percentage of students who actually attend that neighborhood school in that neighborhood. So Lincoln's capture rate is 88%, Wilson's capture rate is 87%. That is why you see that differential. And then you have scenario 2, resulting enrollment, and then you can see the estimated change in enrollment in this column. Okay, so I'm going to quickly talk about your materials. So you have the quadrant maps. You should have those. And these materials are meant to aid your discussion. And these are also available online. And then I wanted to talk about the quadrant sort of data sheets that you should also have in your packets and what some of this information means. So the first thing I want to point out is enrollment is as of October 1st, 2014. And I want to talk a little bit about that because in short order here, we are going to input new data into all these models to represent the data from this year and the capture rates from this year. So I just want to be totally transparent about that. And the timeline for doing that and reporting it is early December. We also have average enrollment per grade right here. And just want to be clear that this is the average enrollment per grade, and it does not include the school's immersion strands, okay? Well, we set aside rooms for those students. So they show up in the data, they just didn't show up in this column, and if that's too confusing, we can change the way that's reported, and so we're welcome to feedback. I think one of the things that we've heard from different communities and principals is that, and we can go either way on this, but sometimes when you have an immersion program in a school and then you also have the neighborhood program, that you really need to consider both of those separately, especially when it comes to staffing and so forth. And so so we could go either way on that one, but that's how this has been reported. So I want to talk a little about, this is utilization, really that's facility capacity or facility utilization, and just so you know what's in those. So the facility utilization figures account for general education funded staff, so your teachers, et cetera. They account for existing immersion programs that are growing. So we have put that into the model. They account for special education learning centers, special education self-contained classrooms, and special education focused classrooms. So that's all in the model. And what I mean by in the model is it assumes that you need classrooms for those activities, for those programs. ESL classrooms are built into the model, and existing pre-K classrooms are built into the model. And then on their data packet, you'll see something that says percent in poverty or percent navigating poverty. So this is the percent poverty is the number of students who qualify for free meals through what we call direct certification by the state of Oregon. So in the past, we used free and reduced meals. Because of the community eligibility provision, and I won't go into all the detail on that, the district uses a new way to summarize poverty, and that's called direct certification. So that's what this is. The district's average would be 29%, so if that helps you. The other really important point is that this number represents the poverty for the overall neighborhood assigned to the school. So not the actual school, but what the neighborhood in the school. Yeah.
The children in the neighborhood?
Yes. Thank you. And yes, the children in the neighborhood in that grade group. Thank you. Okay, and then the last, a couple other things to note is if in this report you'll see red, that's called conditional formatting, and it's highlighted in red if enrollments are less than 50 students per grade or facility utilization is above 105%. So that's meant to just help you guys quickly discern where we might have some challenges. Another thing that's not on the slide, but the number reassigned includes both transfers in as a result of the change. It also includes transfers out. Okay? Okay. That is my overview.
So Sarah, one more time, so that's kind of a gross, not a net?
Yes, that's a good way of putting it, a gross, not a net.
So good evening, everyone. Let me just also quickly note that so what you have in this set, which is also posted online now, is a group of schools divided by quadrant. So this group of schools will match up with the map that follows the same quadrant. The first page is a snapshot of that school, including the programs located in that school in 2014-15. And you see the program columns that go to the right. DLI is dual language immersion, so that would be if there's an immersion program there. And then a thematic focus like the Odyssey program or Sunnyside Environmental School. And then whether they have a focus room for special education. So that's a room where students, often from other neighborhoods, come and they spend most of their day in that room. And then whether there is a pre-K program on site at that school. That's a little more detail about the school on the first page than what you see on the subsequent pages. Each region also has about 3 more pages. And on those next 3 pages, it's a breakdown of different key performance indicators by scenario. So it's a comparison of, for example, the average enrollment per grade and the current state, that is the 2014 enrollment, in scenario 1, if it were all in place in 2014. In scenario 1, with 2020 numbers, and then the same things for scenario 2. And then on the last of those pages, there's a glossary that's on this page with a little more description in case you're using this and you, just a reminder of what those data pieces are. Kim? That is a really good question. We took this off of our list based on what's open for transfers, but IB typically hasn't been, but it is an important program and we can certainly add that. As with many things, you are our first and best audience for our documents. So as you go through your discussions tonight, you may find things that we've missed, and we are welcome. We look forward to hearing comments like that one so that we can improve these documents as we're using them with the community.
Sure. Sarah, could you remind us all the reasoning behind the preferred enrollments and what possibly could happen if you don't have the preferred enrollments?
Sure. So the question was, can you remind us all why preferred enrollment is important and what could happen if you don't have preferred enrollment? So again, preferred enrollment defined as 3 sections per grade. What we have said from previous analysis is that you can offer our core academic program in a sustainable way at 2 or 3 sections per grade, and I'm talking about grades K through 8 here. But that 3 sections per grade is actually preferred, and the reason why is that we routinely see large enrollment fluctuations by grade, and so it's very easy for a school to sort of pop out of a preferred enrollment per grade. So you end up not being able to sustainably offer that core program. So if you have 3 sections per grade, you just flat out have more buffer or more room to prevent risk of not being able to offer that core program. Does that help?
Does the capture rate, and it's probably different in every school, but how much does the capture rate vary per year or on a multi-year average? Do you know, just on average?
I don't have a great sense on that. I mean, I think that the variation between schools is pretty consistent, but like within a school, it changes some. I'd say that it's important to note that the SACIT recommendations last year restricted neighborhood-to-neighborhood transfers, as well as also changed the preference for transferring into a focus option program. And so when we refresh the numbers in the next couple weeks, we will see different capture rates as a result of that.
Mine's really quick. It's to John. It's to your timeline under next steps.
Yes.
and then the one after that. I know we have it somewhere in our documents, but do we have a deadline in December? I mean, do we have a, let's shoot for this date?
Yes, so we had previously put a target date for the committee to make a recommendation to the superintendent of about mid-December, or an arbitrary date of December 15th, so mid-December. That's the date we were shooting for.
Sarah just said Christmas Eve.
Okay.
But if folks would like me to take a vote, I can call for one. Okay, I've been voted.
Ha ha.
Oh, Michelle.
So if we have questions or comments about this handout, is now the time, or are we going to go over this some more?
We're going to spend quite a bit of time diving into these very deeply. And if at the end of your conversations you still have the question, then definitely bring it up. So what we want to do now is, last meeting it was an introduction to the scenarios. This meeting is a deep dive into the scenarios. Unfortunately, we don't necessarily have enough time for all of you to dive into all four to the same depth. So the solution was that each of you would get to dive into two of them. And the mechanism to do that is we have some, I don't know if table captains might be the right word, or guides, Pamela, Matthew, Joe, and Jason. And they will, in effect, each group you'll spend about a half hour learning and discussing one of the quadrants. And then after half an hour, you'll physically stand up and you'll move one table over and do the same thing again with another quadrant. And having done that twice as a committee member, it'll be really easy for you to go through on your own to the other two quadrants that you didn't work on tonight. So this is, the goal here is to really have you guys grapple with the data and the maps and the information, and do it in a small group way so that you can, you've learned a lot together, and this is a chance to put some of your learning to work in evaluating these scenarios. So you'll spend some time, about a half hour, you'll switch, you'll spend about a half hour, and then we'll have our kind of table guides. We'll have a large group discussion, and our table guides will report out a few key things that were uncovered or that were talked about. And then with the remaining time, we'll have a bit of a large group discussion. So that's our process. Any process clarification questions from the committee? Let me get them started and I'll get to you. So at this point, Pamela, Matthew, Joe, and Jason, take it away, and I'll bellow at you all in about a half hour, and we'll change tables. Thank you.
So first of all, each of them has a region that they've, and they each agreed to come in a little early and get prepped for this. So I believe that, and you can start with the cluster that you want to learn the most about, as long as we can try and balance things out. So I'm going to say who's where, and then if you feel like moving, you can. So Pamela, I believe, is southeast. Matthew is the west side, southwest and northwest. Joe Zinder is inner northeast, the central northeast, and Jason Tremblay's table is north, and the edge of northeast. So you can either stay where you are, or you can go to another place where you have a broader interest. Just try and keep it somewhat balanced so that everybody has equal time to talk. Good luck.
Hey, Jim, for the sake of the audience, I think you're saying if there's 60 minutes for everybody to come on and dinner or something, I think, having been to a few meetings, that for 60 minutes is do nothing, but the audience is really to participate or hear or anything, and if you guys want to know that, if you're back in an hour, they'll report out, that's something you can hear and listen to. But if you didn't grab dinner, you might have 50 minutes to
Yeah, Brad.
Did you order chocolate? I did, because I'm a gift giver. Well, I don't know, just divide it in case everybody's.
All right, D-BRAC, let's reconvene as a large group here. And we're going to do a quick report out. It looks like Joe is ready.
Ready?
All right, 10 more seconds on your passing time. Sit wherever you like. And what we're going to do process-wise is I'm going to ask each of the table guides to report out a couple of key things. And we'll start with Joe.
Are we ready?
We're eating our own time. All right, I'm not going to let you guys sit next to each other next time. We're a minute over. All right, let's get it going. Now, we're starting with Joe. He volunteered about a minute and a half ago, but a certain table that I'm standing next to wasn't ready to finish. So here we go, Joe.
So I'm going to report out. We had two, of course, groups go through. One dealt on the data, one dealt on the geography, because they were so knowledgeable. We were so knowledgeable about the geography and what's going on. And so the one thing that came out of that is that there's two different ways of working our way through this puzzle, and it's not obvious to me how to link wanting to draw maps and thinking it through that way and looking back at the data, and we can't do both in real time. So it's a puzzlement.
Sean, can you make that happen?
It's just a puzzlement because of, and really the second group just knew a lot about Central East, Central Northeast. In terms of feedback on the table, on the direct certification table, it was suggested that we, through color or some means, show which ones are changing from elementary schools to middle schools and vice versa. It seemed very important to have information not just about the neighborhood programs, but the co-located programs. In both groups, there was a lot of discussions of trying to think through what the implications of that were in terms of the capacity of the school. And then in the second group, there was a whole, and they're with me here, so, but there was a whole strategy around how, you strategically locate immersion programs, for instance, amongst schools that feed into the same middle school, how you treat the middle school, how that all stacks up in terms of an immersion sort of system, to the extent that I understand it. And then, then the one that became real interesting because of this central northeast situation is schools that have IB. So I don't know if that rises to the level of immersion, but when you look at it, there's a way that maybe you can track from an elementary school, a K-5 with that, to a middle school with that. And then maybe there's a way that, so that kind of tracking the programs from the K-5s to the middle school and using that as a way to draw your boundaries. There was a proximity to the middle school, seemed to be a big deal, and especially around boundary changes. And what's interesting is when you're just looking at this district, Central Northeast, you're not seeing how that plays out across the rest of the city. So, you can't norm it against, because the comment came up about, well, you should see what the West Side has. So you can't norm that expectation. So to the extent that that's important, that was in here as well. And Whitaker is missing. So there was this sort of sense that when you look at the map exercise, you can see there's a history of how these boundaries were drawn. There's a history of how these places have also evolved, or not evolved, but fluctuated in populations of kids over time. And the past era of not enough kids has left us with some holes in facilities. It's not saying solve it or not. It's just part of what the complicating factor is on this. And what was interesting to me too, not knowing as much as anybody about really what's going on here, we were solving problems, it was good discussions, and I had no way to judge if it related back to our criteria and our principles at all. Like, we'll come back at them later, but we were drawing boundaries and scenarios for other reasons than the reasons that we put in our framework. Okay, well, see, you know it. See, I don't know it. I have no way of knowing that, and so to the extent that I will participate in this discussion, I can't.
Thank you. Matthew?
But if anything came out of your discussion, that's a specific request. So we'd like to see X. Now, you don't have to go back and do it now. Try and include it in, or make sure it's written somewhere and it gets to staff. We talk. Yeah, but anything that's a specific ask for something you'd like to see, just so that you can find out if it would make a difference, please give us the specifics at some point so that we can get started on it.
Okay, so we only have specific asks, so that may address your concern. And so of the two groups, I think there was pretty uniform agreement on some of we're northwest, southwest, on some of the points. And so they were grouped into three categories: general, not related necessarily to northwest, southwest, skyline, and then the west side generally. So for the general, forecasting enrollment numbers and not just a percent or a proportion. So looking at the scenarios built out to 2020, the whole numbers themselves. And then we really liked on the high school sheet, I don't have it, but where you could see the additions and the subtractions of students instead of just the net by school. And so if we could do that for all schools, that would be great. On Skyline, the special interest, because it's a smaller school, what the programming impacts would be in the scenarios. There's an interest in getting to know a better idea of the number or proportion of the students that are transferring from the Roosevelt cluster, and then subsequently the impact of the Sackett changes on Skyline enrollment and those transfers from the Roosevelt cluster. And then a scenario build out what would happen if Skyline was kept to K-8 but added to the Roosevelt cluster. And then for the rest of Northwest and Southwest, an interest in getting to know what the Lincoln and Wilson building capacity is, and then the timeline of the rebuild and what kind of impact that has in the context of boundary changes. A better understanding of the topography in Southwest. Some of the folks didn't have a good understanding of when it came to trying to get to school, what the topography looked like. And then outside of Skyline, between scenario 1 and scenario 2, we effectively have one scenario. And so there was an interest in seeing what other changes could accomplish the same goals. And so we didn't have just effectively one scenario to work with on the west side. We looked at specifically, we had some conversations around looking at 19th and Quimby and some Conway property. And in the context of, there are some, there's general development, and Joe knows, and some of the work of planning in the comp plan and forecasting new households. But there's currently construction happening and permits being pulled for some pretty massive multifamily buildings in Northwest, in the Lloyd District, and the Central East Side. A better understanding of how the large-scale development that's happening in really real time, not potential development in 10 years, but the current large-scale development is factored into the forecast. Let's see. More information on the IB and dual immersion programming and why it's so valuable for so many parents that have come to testify. What a scenario that doesn't include a K-5 split feeder pattern might look like. And then an interest in getting feedback from specifically some families from Maplewood And a note that in the table form, it doesn't reflect that there's a boundary change because you're transferring the entire K-5 into a new middle school, and the table kind of has a net zero and doesn't mark a change, and we just thought that could be misleading. So.
Pamela.
Right, I think our two groups came up with relatively specific questions. First, in the table format, there's we talk about average students per grade, and other places we talk about sections per grade, and to make sure that we kind of either do both or pick one, but we felt like we were always translating students to sections to programs, and that made things more complex. We noted that there are some schools where there's very small groups of students reassigned, so like 40, and the impact of very small numbers and what that would feel like versus 300. We were talking about the proximity of Creston to Franklin and how in one of the scenarios, and I don't recall which one, Franklin goes to Cleveland, and if there were, Creston goes to Cleveland, and is there potentially a way to look at whether it could go to Franklin or potentially Sunnyside could feed to Cleveland that's maybe equidistant? We can't really tell. But is there a way to make sure that Creston feeds to Franklin due to proximity? We noted that the boundary display for the middle school boundaries is sometimes difficult, that yellow color. We talked a little bit about how to grapple with the contradictions of K-8 versus K-5, and really on a school-by-school level, what's the impact on programming if schools were to stay at K-8, and what is both the school impact and the system impact? And then there was a conversation about noting what schools were 100%, and Harriet, you're gonna have to help me here, 100% free and reduced lunch due to high direct certification levels, and there's a specific term that I don't know what it is. CEP schools, and if we could somehow denote which schools were CEP schools with an asterisk or something so that we were aware of that. Did I leave anything out? Both on a school level and a system level, so it might have one impact at Irvington, but that there may be ripple effects from. It may work on one school level, but it may not work on a system level.
Yeah, so I'll just add a couple of comments because a lot of things that have been said are things that my groups came up with. I think in particular, kind of teasing out the numbers in terms of low-income students who are either on CEP or direct service, figuring out because those numbers don't catch all the students, because one of the things we also identified was in some cases under one certification, some families don't feel comfortable filling out those forms, so you're going to miss some students in one designation, but you're on a different designation, you may catch them. So disaggregating that data will allow us to actually kind of better identify which schools will be higher poverty than others, so being clear about that. Given that we were talking about north and northeast, oh, yeah. So one of the concerns that came up in looking at the students who are, the percentage of students who are identified in poverty, figuring out those ones that were, the direct service or the CEP, kind of teasing out those numbers more if it was possible to get a better sense of, is that consistent across or, because something like that.
They're all direct certified.
Okay.
What's showing is the kids who are in a neighborhood who qualify for state certification. They don't have, these are kids who are not filling out free and reduced meal forms because the system, we learn from the state of Oregon, and then when a school has enough of those, then every student in the school is eligible for free meals regardless of whether they fill out an application or not. Yes.
Got it.
Because you exceeded 40% of your students who had direct certification, which is SNAP or foster or other state or federal levels of assistance. So it avoids having to fill out, like whether a family fills out a paper or not.
Right. Okay.
The threshold, like to qualify, it's like 135% of poverty rather than 185% of poverty, which is like reduced price. 40% for Title I. 40% for Title I, a little over 60% for all the students in the school to eat for free.
Okay, that's what I thought. I thought 40 sounded low. Okay. So 60.
But Sean,
Right.
Sean, you were starting to answer my question, which was, how does the state, what is the cutoff for the state direct certification, which I think you were saying was like.
It's closer to 130. It's closer to 135% of poverty, whereas if you filled out a reduced price meal form, which this year, if you did, or you would eat for free, it would be 185%.
135%.
Yeah.
And that's why the numbers look lower than what people are used to seeing.
Yes.
Okay.
135%. No, wait a minute, they should be higher. Through a different program. So we used to just count everybody who filled out a free and reduced meal application every year.
Yes, okay.
And you may be eligible even if you're not participating in other programs. This is just a measure of the data we receive through the state of students who qualify through other programs.
So, yeah, I get it. It's going to be lower than if you had filled out the paper, because if everyone in the school filled out the paper, only the kids who are 185% of poverty would be eligible. But through direct certification, the standard is lower. Right. But isn't it also true that this is a neighborhood, not a school-based?
Yes. Yes, it's a neighborhood.
Whereas
Right now.
Right.
So it's
The other way I might just talk about this is in the past we had the applications that were called free and reduced lunch. When we moved over to direct certification, it's actually closer to just being free lunch. So it's like you dropped off the reduced. Okay?
Right.
So, Margaret?
And as a rule of thumb-ish, like, to compare to, like, old metrics, it's about, like, free-reduced lunch was around 56 to 60% in the district, historically.
45, yeah.
45. So you're at about half, right? So if you double the number, it gives you'll be over 100%, but in some schools, but if you double, it's roughly, if you double, it gets you back to where you were. If you were to index it again.
It's about a third, right? You went from about 45%.
I thought you said it was 29.
Yeah, 29, 30, so yeah.
So let's go back to Jason to finish reporting out what the group talked about. Clearly, there's a lot of interest around some arcane formulas that are important, and let's hear what else the group had to say.
So, two other minor things, and then I'll wrap up, which is in North Portland, there are 3 cases where, due to either a grade reconfiguration or a boundary change, you were making, I think, 3 schools higher low poverty. So I think it's bad. Higher concentration of students in poverty. Thank you. And then the other thing, we had a number of questions that came up was, how do the numbers, account for placement of, current immersion programs that are going to grow? So I think, for example, in scenario 2, you have a situation where Beach is converted to a K-5 as well as King, where Beach has the Spanish immersion program and there was a Mandarin Chinese program placed at King, and both of those schools will eventually feed into Ockley Green Middle School. So does that school, A, have the space to hold both a neighborhood program and 2 different immersion programs simultaneously? And how do you build in enough infrastructure to accommodate basically 3 different programs in one building?
The answer is yes. Just so you know, that's what we mean by when we factored in existing immersion programs that are growing. We basically set aside the anticipated number of rooms that would be needed in the schools that house those programs.
So utilization reflects what you just said, Sarah?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe so. Definitely in the forecast and in the scenario 1 and 2 they do. I would need to like check the like King and Roseway Heights for the current state. I can't remember how we showed it on this version. Yes.
For scenario 1 and 2, they do, the answer is yes, they do reflect it.
I had a related thought about that when I was over at Joe's table that didn't get mentioned. I think you should consider the possibility that in the middle grades, immersion isn't really a programming constraint because it takes the place of an elective. And if anything, it's maybe opening up elective space for the other students in the building in some way. So it's not, I think at the K-5 level, you really need to parse that out in the buildings, but I don't think you need to do that in the middle schools or the high schools.
Yeah, you mean from a space standpoint? It is calculated differently already. So
okay.
Yeah. we took
So
that
in the
into
middle
account.
schools and the high schools, it's really not a constraint on
Build
space.
on class on
It's not really.
classrooms. That's correct. That's how it was calculated.
So just to be clear, when a school is showing 60, for example, 65% utilization, that's with the immersion program taken into account.
Yes.
So that's 65%, and the immersion kids are part of that 65%. Okay.
Because they didn't parse it out.
So when we do the forecast, there's a set size for the immersion program. So it doesn't fluctuate. There's just so many spots in it so that we don't have to worry about a forecast for an immersion program. All the forecast growth or decline is in the neighborhood program.
It is built into forecasts to the degree that so for example, in 2013, we added an immersion program to Roseway Heights. That's built into the forecast that PSU provides us for the future, but it's a speculative forecast because we didn't actually have those kids to make sure we had the numbers right yet. One thing, think about it this way, the rooms associated with students who would come to the building for immersion, because it'll be open to kids from outside the neighborhood, those rooms have been calculated into the capacity.
So we have about 2 minutes left. Unless you choose to extend the meeting, which is within your power as per your operating protocols. I want a couple of observations from me. Last meeting and this meeting, as a group, you guys have really dived into this information. And I think it has been really effective for a lot of you to learn with each other. And from a process design point of view in the meetings moving forward, we'd really like to hear your advice and thoughts about what would be useful to work together to continue to learn more about this so that you can be prepared to give the superintendent some advice. So you've got exit slips in your packets. Please give us on the planning team some suggestions about what would be useful for you individually and as a group to move forward. And then also, as mentioned earlier, specific questions or suggestions about the information, how it's presented, so it can be clearer. Please get those to Judy and the planning team. And before I turn it over to Jason to wrap us up, I should say our next meeting is November 19th. Kim, question?
Yeah, I guess I'm I have a problem with the fact that a lot of the things that people are bringing up are things that have been brought up for months. That email that Scott sent out with all of those points, a lot of those had been brought up for months. So filling out an exit slip, asking for the same thing over and over again that we never get to, because I thought we were going to get information on DLI. What is the plan? What is the feeder program? What is all that? Same with SPED. we keep asking for things and we don't get it, and we're getting closer and closer to December, and that timeline is getting more and more unrealistic. And I don't think I'm alone in those thoughts, but I'm a little frustrated because that email, I'm assuming that the email from Scott is going to be taken into consideration. Yes?
Yes. And
I mean, those were pretty specific things, as well as we have a whole page of specific things. I just wonder if they're actually going to have anything done about them.
so from my point of view, the intention is to help this group over the next few meetings have the information so that you feel comfortable giving some advice, whatever that particular advice is, to the superintendent. And it may be, and I think I've said this before, the realm of possibility of advice might be this big, and yet what this group can comfortably agree to might only be that much. Again, and this is a common dynamic that groups experience, is you want to make it as perfect as you possibly can, and there's limited time, and there's a lot of complexity here,
I'm
which
sorry, this
is
isn't
okay
about
to
making
struggle
it
with.
perfect. This is about getting the information. For example, I'm going to go back to the grade configuration. We asked for that for months. And we finally get it in the form of, hey, you guys decide. I'm really worried. I'm really, really worried. I'm really worried about the implementation, about how you're going to get this done by next fall for some of the programs. There's a whole heck of a lot of information missing. And I don't see how we're going to get all that information, listen to the feedback from the public, and have time to give something even remotely mediocre by December. I'm not shooting for perfect because we're nowhere near there. So just my concerns based on the history of this committee.
And I think it is, this committee is new, this community and the district hasn't had this structure before to work on boundary issues. And I think it's a fair point to say we're figuring it out as we go as a committee, and I think as staff as well. So I think one of the things in our creating community was assume good intent and do the best we can. Clearly, there is more work to be done, and that is part of what our mission is over the next few weeks. So it is not easy, and that is, I think, why it's so impressive the work that you've done as a committee over the last few months. You have invested a lot of time, you have learned a lot about very complex topics, and the work isn't over yet, but we're getting close. And we're 3 minutes over. Jason, any last comments before we adjourn?
So the one comment as your chair, what I will do, because we have a planning meeting tomorrow, is this, is that there was an email list of questions or asks made, and we developed a longer list tonight. What I would like to have done by the end of that planning team meeting tomorrow is, based on the master list of data questions, what things, figure out like when can we deliver things to you and get that out to you, so at least we can tell you, or staff can tell you in particular, when things will be coming. Because I don't want to get to December not having acknowledged the list of questions that are still unresolved.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to point out that there's probably, we should probably try to prioritize data because there's a cost. You want to prioritize the things that are going to tell us the most with the, we got to make a cost-benefit calculation on pulling additional information. So, sorry, I'm an economist. I have to say cost-benefit at least once.
We appreciate that.
All right, thanks.
Actually.